Hello everybody, John Felt here. Welcome to the weekly Water Outlook, November 20th, 2016. Well, over the last week, we've had our first winter storm of the season, at least major winter storm. So I start to think about climatology, and usually as we get near Thanksgiving, we start to typically see some adverse winter weather over the far upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Northeast U.S., and then as we get in that period between Christmas and New Year's, it starts to shift south down into more of the Midwest, Ohio River Valley and such. So I think we're going to be dealing with that, and we don't need to look at this as anything unusual. This is just winter climatology. But having said that, it's definitely getting a bit unusual and complex out there. There are very strong temperature anomalies setting up, and when you have these strong temperature anomalies, usually you start to get more active weather. So the Arctic Oscillation, I wanted to start it off sort of looking at sort of the big picture here, and it's really staying negative through the entire period, and that would tend to indicate a little bit of a trough over the eastern U.S., more of an amplified flow. But I think we're really going to see some changes of this maybe a little bit further out, and that doesn't tell the story. So if we look at the temperature anomalies here, there's some very interesting anomalies going on. And I tell you the truth, I can't tell you exactly what this is going to translate to with our weather quite yet, but I think it's something that is quite interesting. And I wanted to point out these unusually warm temperatures over regions of the globe that are normally source regions for the U.S. for cold Arctic air. This is unusually warm at the current time. Now, if we go out to December 6th, you can see it starts to break down a bit, but there's still a lot of warm air. This is the area here where I'd expect to see pooling of extremely cold air. And when I see that pooling of cold air, and two things, pooling just sort of means that it's sort of gathering and setting up there, and after a while it begins to sink south. And that's what I look at for some of our more prolonged Arctic outbreaks. But look at this. To its south, we have this unusually cold temperature pattern over the western U.S. So this is an unusual type pattern, and it'll be interesting to watch over the next couple of weeks how this develops. We have cold air where it's usually not as cold, and we have extremely warm air where we usually get that cold air. So definitely an unusual type pattern. But looking over the last 7 days, I think you can see here, this was one of the action spots for more significant precipitation in the form of snow. And then we had the western coast of the U.S. with an onshore flow, very heavy precipitation over both the immediate coast and higher elevations of the Pacific Northwest and Northern California. If we look at the departure from normal, you can see with the exception of those two areas where we had a surplus of weekly precipitation, pretty much everywhere else we had below normal precipitation. Now, this was from Saturday. We had clear skies over this region, and some of this is melted, but you can very clearly see the snow that fell in this visible satellite picture. And if you look at it today, let me actually go back to this one first. If you look at it today, you can see that a lot of that snow is still there. And if you look at the snow melt over the last 24 hours, you can see very little snow melt. So even though this is only November, and you normally would think November snows would melt fairly quickly, and this will, but right now it's on the ground, and we've had cold air below freezing temperatures, and it has lingered on the ground as of this briefing. Now, if we look at the major river systems across the nation, this is from NOAA's National Water Model. Rivers coated in blue are below average, or I should say above average in blue, and below average is in red. So the Ohio River Basin, the lower Mississippi Basin is currently below average, and the upper Mississippi Basin is above average, but really just a couple weeks or a month or so ago, much brighter blue, wider blue, and that was saying that those rivers were more significantly above normal, and they're beginning to come back much closer to normal, and I think that trend will most likely continue. Over the Pacific Northwest, you can see rivers are also running above normal due to that excessive precipitation. But over the south central U.S., over the lower Mississippi, middle Mississippi, Ohio, that's getting more and more into that region of drought, and you can see flows are getting quite low. So when we look at areas in flood, very few, and we look at areas in drought, lots of areas in drought with very low flows over the south central and southeast U.S., and that corresponds with these areas of extremely low soil moisture. So I'm always looking at vulnerabilities one way or the other, and we're out of tropical season just about. Now, having said that, there is some disturbed weather in the lower Caribbean that's just going to sit there. I'm not too concerned about it, but you can see that the soils are very, very dry over the south central and southeast U.S., and it could take many inches of rain before flooding becomes a concern within that area. Okay, now I've set the stage now for the forecast, so let's take a look at this. And like I said, it's an interesting forecast. It's been a long time, it seems like, where I've been saying sort of status quo or pretty quiet type weather, and looks like we're going to getting into a more active type pattern. And again, that's most likely climatology sort of can explain some of that, but it's still going to be unusual. So anyway, this week we have a ridge of high pressure, fairly weak over the middle part of the nation, and that's going to have temperatures start to rebound, but you can see we still have cooler temperatures over the eastern third of the U.S. and then milder temperatures over the west. Now we have one system coming through this week, and that is going to bring some more snow over the upper Midwest. I want to make a point here. This weekly briefing is usually, I try to give you more short-term information, but I went out a little bit further than the 7-day period, and this upper Midwest looks to me like it could be getting in a repeated type of track of precipitation, so we need to keep an eye on that. This is on Tuesday, and you can see Minnesota again, more snow, and for the week, as far as precipitation goes, pretty much a similar story that we had last week, where we're looking at parts of the Midwest for rain or snow, and then the Pacific Northwest with that flow onshore, still heavy precipitation, the immediate coast, and perhaps the higher elevations of the Pacific Northwest. Also Northern California. Now, it's interesting to note, or it should be noted, that the southeast U.S., no significant rainfall that would do much to help with the drought, and also Southern California, that area of drought, also no significant relief in that area. As far as snowfall goes over the next week, looks like the possibility, again, very similar area that received it over the last week, over parts of Minnesota, generally northern Wisconsin, and then more scattered areas of northern Michigan and parts of the northeast U.S. Now, as we get into the 6 to 10 day period, we see more significant changes, and we're going to go through a transition. Remember the first 5 days, very light ridging within the middle part of the nation, and now we're seeing more of this blue. And that's saying that the jet stream is sinking to the south, and that's going to usher in colder air. And it's going to be a transition. We don't really see it here in the 6 to 10 day average. This is still more of that ridging. But then when we get into the November 30th to December 5th, after the period of Thanksgiving, that's when we really see that change. We see the very strong trough digging in the western U.S., very significant trough. Now, remember earlier in the briefing, I said a transition. I think we're going to see some active winter weather and perhaps just regular rainfall weather over the core central part of the U.S. with this type of pattern. The reason I say that is you get energy that comes down into the system, and it's going to be ejected out with this southwest flow, and that's going to be enough energy to give us some precipitation. So as far as temperatures go, this is where we transition now into that new pattern. So we've really, starting right now, and then as we get past that period of 6 to 10 days, that's the transition. Then we get into 11 to 15 days and look at this cold air over the western half of the U.S. So, and even the eastern half is not all that impressive. So we have that reverse here. The warmer air is up to the north in Canada. The milder air, the colder air from an anomaly standpoint is over the western U.S. Okay, so precipitation. Here's this week. Pretty strong confidence this week. Above normal anomaly in a small section right here. Above normal anomaly in this section here. And look at the southeast again. Very strong, dry anomaly. Now, week 2, with that transition, that's where we start to see much more, perhaps messier type pattern. Wouldn't be surprised to see more snow over the upper Midwest, parts of the Dakotas, Nebraska, maybe Minnesota and Iowa. And then you see less yellow here, less dry anomalies, and perhaps more wet anomalies. So we'll have to see. That maybe is a little bit of relief for the southeast U.S., but I wouldn't get too excited about it at the current time. As far as hazards go, in the short term here, what we have is that area of heavy precipitation over the upper Midwest and the western U.S., and much below normal temperatures in the short term over the southeast U.S. with that lingering cold air. I think I've covered the trends with you pretty good, so I'm not going to go over them once again, but certainly a very changeable and interesting pattern as we go forward. I have a lot to cover this week, and I want to take time to wish you all a great Thanksgiving. If you're traveling, have safe travels. If you have some questions, looks like mainly the area that could have some concerns, the upper Midwest, but that should be passed by Thanksgiving. But if you have any questions, feel free to email me, john@bluewateroutlook.com, and I'd be glad to help you with some travel plans as far as the weather goes. Anyway, have a great Thanksgiving, and I'll be talking with you again next weekend.